Advanced HE Student Surveys Guide, Your Student Sample and Pre-Population. This guide looks at uploading your survey sample and associated data to the Jisc online surveys platform. There's guidance on how to construct your survey sample in the surveys manual. UCES is for students on taught courses at foundation and undergraduate level. PTES is for students on taught courses at postgraduate level. And PRES is for qualifications gained mainly through research at postgraduate level. But really, it's about what survey fits the needs of your students and the institution. There's two questions to ask. What's most useful for the people running the course? And which survey would be most useful for enhancement on the course? Talking with teaching or professional staff who deliver the course is a good way of making an informed decision and engaging people with the survey. So, you've decided on which students to include in your survey. You'll need data for each of these students, but which data? The survey's preparation manual includes a list of suggested data that should be requested from your institutional data team. This data can be used to pre-populate questions on the survey. The pre-population parameters screen on Jisc has details on which questions can be pre-filled with data associated with students in your survey sample. We can see which pre-population parameters are tied to which questions on the survey, and what values are allowed for each question. But this information isn't in a form that we can work with easily. More detailed guidance is available in the survey's coding guide, which has information on what questions are pre-populated, how to pre-populate those questions, how institutional data can be translated into pre-population data, and what format the data needs to be in. You should have received the survey's coding guide from surveys@advancedhe.ac.uk. Please get in touch if you haven't. To see what fields are used, why, and how they can be pre-populated, let's look at one of the guide worksheets, PTES Guide. The guide worksheet lists all the fields that are uploaded to Jisc. It details whether the fields are mandatory or optional, which questions on the survey they are linked to, and what the purpose of the pre-population is. The guide worksheet also indicates whether the student will see the question if it isn't pre-populated or if it's always hidden. This is particularly important for the discipline question in PTES and UCES, as without pre-population, there will be no information on the dataset for this question. There is also an indication if the value is included on the dataset. So here we see that email, respondent ID and password will not be on your downloaded dataset. By contrast, the student ID field is included in the dataset, along with course, department and faculty fields. The student ID field would usually be pre-populated with a username or similar unique student ID, allowing you to tie back student responses to institutional data. If you wish to run the survey wholly anonymously, then you don't need to include this field. The guide worksheet also broadly sets out what values the field can contain and where information on mapping from your institutional data is held. The most important thing to understand around pre-population is that where questions are being pre-populated, the upload needs to match the questions exactly. Let's look at the next worksheet, clicking on the PTES Allowed tab. Here, we can see the values that are permitted within each pre-population field. The order of the fields is the same as that needed for the upload into the Jisc access control. Where the values pre-populate a question, then they need to exactly match the values in the question, shown here for domicile. For other fields, as shown on the guide, if the values are broadly valid, then they can be used. For example, a valid email address for the email field. The example PTES CSV format worksheet shows an example of a file for upload to Jisc. There's one of these for each survey. We want a sample to look something like the example CSV format. On the top row, we have the name of each of the fields. The first three fields, email, respondent ID and password, enable student access to the Jisc platform. The other fields handle routing, pre-populate demographic questions, and pre-populate hidden fields. But let's look at what an extract of student data might actually look like. The extract of student data might actually look something like this. A student username and email are included, along with HESA fields that can be used to pre-populate questions on the survey. A good example is the HESA field recording the permanent address of the student. We can use the values here to pre-populate questions on the domicile of the student and whether they're an international student. However, we need to recode these values before uploading into Jisc. Let's go back to the survey's coding guide. And now go to the Mapping from HESA tab. Here we have a number of HESA fields with their associated values. And the related values for pre-population into Jisc. Here, for domicile, the HESA value XH is mapped to the pre-population value Scotland for the domicile field. It's important to note that the HESA label is similar to the domicile question, but it isn't identical, such as here for the Åland Islands. The mapping can also go from the HESA value to pre-populate the international field. A VLOOKUP function in Excel, or similar, can be used to translate the data you hold for your students into the pre-population values for Jisc, to construct your sample with associated data for upload. The discipline field is a special case. For many students, their courses or supervision may relate to multiple subject codes or unit of assessment codes. For example, here the student has a course split 50-50 between two different codes. If your institution has already allocated programs or courses to a single unit of assessment code or single HECOS-CA code, then these can be mapped directly to pre-population using the survey coding guide. Here's the mapping for Ref Unit of Assessment to the PRES discipline field. For PTES and UKES, as any one course can have up to 5 HECOS codes associated with it, it's expected that there will need to be some judgment as to how to allocate courses. Advanced HE provides an Excel macro to support this process. There's a separate YouTube guide available on using the macro. I've run through the coding guide and mapping of pre-population data, which should give you a nicely formatted table for upload to Jisc. The final step is to save as a CSV, comma delimited file. If you're running a Welsh survey, you'll need to use a UTF-8 CSV, which can handle special characters. Otherwise, you can use a standard version. There's a lot more detail about pre-population to discuss. If you'd like to delve into more details about the different fields, then the next guide covers that. Otherwise, you can skip ahead to launching the survey.